Welcome to today's DAIReXNET webinar. We're very happy to have this presentation for you today. And it's going to be on using social media to deliver extension. And I want to introduce our speaker to you. Dr. Alison Van Eenenum is genomics and biotechnology researcher and cooperative extension specialist in the Department of Animal Science at University of California, Davis. The mission of her extension program is to provide research and education on the use of animal genomics and biotechnology in livestock production systems. Her outreach program focuses on the development of science-based educational materials, including the controversial biotechnologies of genetic engineering, that is GE, and cloning. Dr. Van Eenenum was the recipient of the 2014 Borlaug Council for Agricultural Science and Technology, that's CAST, Communication Award. And we have an exciting presentation today by Dr. Van Eenenum, and it's on using social media to deliver extension. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Van Eenenum.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Bob, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. I'm basically going to be talking a little bit about researchers' use of social media in general, and then how I'm using social media in my particular extension program. And then a little bit more broadly on the good, the bad, and the ugly of social engagement, because although it's a very powerful tool, it's certainly also a tool that has some drawbacks associated with it that I think especially public sector scientists and researchers need to be aware of. And so then finally touch on some, what I would argue are unresolved issues in the merit and promotion system that was set up in an era when there was no social media. And I think that maybe causes some difficulties with some of the younger faculty who don't really have very good mentors in that regard, because a lot of us, myself included, are really coming to social media late in our extension careers, and where what we consider our tools of interaction and traditional methods of extension are, just a telephone and a conventional meeting, and the whole concept of some of the different YouTube and LinkedIn's and Pinterest and all of that really is not something that we're necessarily very familiar with. I guess we're not internet natives, but we've come to it as immigrants and are using it to different levels and with different levels of success as a result of that. And in general, I think that scientists and researchers have been quite slow to social media, especially as it relates to how to use it in your actual work. So although many may have a Facebook page, it doesn't necessarily occur to researchers to put up a Facebook page around their research per se. They probably just use it to post their family's Christmas pictures. And I think in general that scientists are somewhat cautious about public outreach, and this particular nature issue that I have up on the slide here was from 2015, where there was discussion at the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting, where there was discussion about the fact that 87% of people or scientists think that they should engage in public discourse. A much lower number of that actually are, and actually I think it was less than 25% were using social media in any way in their work. And I think there was, if you follow Twitter, some of the comments here were, been saying it for years, scientists need to come down from their ivory tower and engage the public, and that Twitter may be the future of science comm, but remember, most scientists aren't there. And I think that that's particularly true for scientists that are over 30, perhaps, where Twitter is still kind of a concept that isn't utilized much in their programs. And why do scientists not engage with the public? And I think this comment here that there's really no rewards and a lack of peer approval and doubt about the level of interest is some of the reasons that scientists are not necessarily engaging in public media. And others say, well, it should be okay not to engage. Some are ill-equipped, shy, maybe not particularly well suited to public engagement or not interested in doing it, and that 87% sounds pretty good. Well, the 87% was people who thought that they should. It wasn't necessarily people that are, and I think it's somewhat frustrating to have, you know, a large number of scientists that are working on really terrific projects, but the public never really gets to hear about any of that because there's no public engagement there. And so to me, I see the importance of the public engagement around my area of speciality, animal biotechnology, because in the absence of having a discussion around the techniques and methods that are being used there, the risk is that we'll actually not be allowed to use those methods and techniques, and there needs to be discussion around it and public discourse in order for us to really enable the use of innovation in animal breeding. And so working in animal agriculture and GMOs, I'm probably in the two most controversial areas of agriculture, so I do think it's important to be able to discuss that with the public and explain why we're using some of the technologies and what the potential benefits could be both to animals and also to agriculture in general. And I guess that's part of the reason that I'm interested in using these types of tools. So I'm going to go through a little bit of how I use social media in my particular extension program, and I think if you haven't yet used social media, you need to sit down before you start considering it and think about, well, who is it that I'm trying to reach? And because different social media target different clientele, and if you're not at all familiar with these different forums, things like Pinterest, basically the demographic there is very, very high numbers of women, and it's a site where people post images of things that interest them, and you can get different themes, but a lot of it is used for things like, I don't know, recipes for chicken or things like that are not at all in the work realm, but it also does get used for maybe a trending topic on, I don't know, climate change or something like that. So, but that type of a demographic, if you're targeting, as I am, beef cattle producers, you know, Pinterest probably isn't going to be my #1 go-to social media site because there's just not a lot of beef cattle producers on Pinterest. And so I think it's really important to think through who's your target audience and where are you likely to reach them. And in my case where I'm working typically with an older clientele, typically male, who may not be on the internet at all. And so it may be that although I can have a great Twitter presence, that's not actually going to reach the clientele I'm interested in reaching for my beef, cattle and breeding information. And so it may well be that a good old newsletter that's made out of paper and sent to their postal address is still the best way to reach that clientele. And so I don't see social media as replacing extension. I see it as complement extension and expanding our reach to audiences that we potentially couldn't get to earlier before the advent of social media, and particularly urban audiences and young audiences. And so if there's an opportunity there to educate them in some way about animal agriculture or agriculture in general in an engaging way, then that's really some of the power of some of these social media places. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the three kind of things I use in my extension program. One is YouTube, one is Twitter, and then also talk a little bit about eBeef, which is the beef community of practice in e-extension that myself and 5 colleagues from land-grant universities have been working on to establish some outreach materials related to beef cattle breeding and genetics. I am a member of LinkedIn, to be honest with you. I don't really understand that application very well. I get a lot of emails from it. It's almost like some sort of an internet stalker at times, but it's not something that I use very much, so I won't really discuss that. And I don't know if other people have had better experiences with that one, but that's not one that I use a lot. So with regards to YouTube, you know, this is a video sharing site, and you can upload videos that are longer than 3 minutes. It used to have a 3 or 5 minute limit, but I've used it in ways to upload this particular example as a 30-minute documentary style video, I guess, animal biotechnology that I made several years ago now. And it's posted there actually under UC Davis or UC in general TV. And you can see there over on the right that it's had 87,000 or almost 88,000 views. And I think what's surprising, given how controversial animal biotechnology and cloning and genetic engineering is the fact that the likes, which is the little hand going with the blue hand doing the up thumb, outweigh the dislikes by quite a large number. And I think that's a really good sign. And I think if you look at some of the comments under that, people appreciate that this was basically an objective piece discussing the technologies without any slant one way or the other as to whether it was evil or going to save the world. It was really just discussing the technology. And so that's certainly 87,000 views that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had that out there, but it pales in significance to some of the views that things like Charlie bit my finger or some celebrity doing something they'll get millions and millions of views. But I think you have to be realistic when you put up a scientific piece, how many views you're likely to get there. So that's a fairly serious piece that I have up. This is a similar piece, 30-minute long, that discusses genetic engineering in California agriculture, and it was put together in the early 2000s when there was a lot of controversy around whether we should ban genetic engineering in agriculture in California, and it's really was used a lot during those discussions to kind of set the educational context of what genetic engineering was and what it's being used for, prior to often these public groups would then launch into a debate on the pros and cons. But at least it got it off on the right scientific footing so that there was an understanding of what it was that the debate was about, and then citizens made their own decisions from there. And so that one hasn't been as popular as genetically engineered animals. It's actually been up longer, I think, but it hasn't had as many hits. But again, I'm somewhat encouraged by the fact that it hasn't been severely disliked by a large number of people. And then you can use it for some more fun things. And so Animal Science Society had a competition where you had to make a 5-minute video, and I made a musical parody that was called Were Those the Days, My Friend, that kind of compared and contrasted 1950s agriculture to current agriculture against the backdrop of a song called Those Were the Days, My Friend, that was 1950s kind of a hit. And this one is kind of interesting in terms of the number of likes there, the little blue hand. You can see it's got way more likes than the animal biotech video. And the reason for that is that the way that the Animal Science ran that competition is that you had to get the most number of likes in order to win the competition. And so there was active encouragement on behalf of myself to tell people to go and like the video. And it was kind of interesting for me working with different generations, because all of the students that I worked with understood what I meant, but I had some of my older colleagues come and say, "Oh yeah, I really liked your video." And I said, "Well, did you like it though?" And they said, "Well, yeah, I said I really liked it." And I'm like, no, you have to go click the little hand guy to make it count for a like. And so liking is actually now not just a verb, I guess it's a noun. But I thought that was kind of a fun thing. And we have also done a similar, I did a similar one just recently called What Do the Facts Say, that is based on that. There's a fairly recent musical called What Does the Fox Say, that my adolescent son said would be a good one to make a video to. And this one hasn't been up as long. I actually did it for the Cast Borlaug Award back in 2014. And it's basically comparing and contrasting different well-known people making comments about scientific issues related to climate change and vaccines and GMOs, and then comparing and contrasting it to what the science says about those same topics, and trying to, in an amusing way, kind of suggest that there is actually a pretty broad scientific consensus around these topics, and that these sensationalistic, often news programs or Dr. Oz, are really not really saying what the general consensus is around these topics. And so I find that, this is a YouTube Google of my name in YouTube, And a lot of different groups that I've spoken at are actually now recording the presentations, either using Camtasia or some other Adobe Connect type program. And that's actually quite a simple thing to install on your computer, and it enables you to record a presentation. And if you're doing a lot of presentations, you can just do a quick Camtasia capture and then post that up on YouTube. And instead of reaching the however many people you've got in your audience, you now have the possibility to have a much larger reach. And so I've actually had quite a lot of exposure through different people recording presentations and putting them up on YouTube. And a lot of people use YouTube now as their go-to source for information. And so it used to be more of a recreational, silly video site, but there's actually a lot of educational content there now. And so I think it's a very useful tool for extension programs. So the next thing I want to move on to is this eBeef organization, and electronic beef is what that was based after. And basically what this was a group of us getting together to form a community of practice within e-extension. And our mission was to foster research and outreach, engaging in beef cattle producers and ag professionals around beef cattle breeding and genetics. And we have a number of different things in our site here. If you actually open ebeef.org, it'll start up that there's a little YouTube clip there where you can see in that black and white box there that the 6 of us that are involved in eBeef. And starting on the left is Dare Bullock from University of Kentucky, then Jared Decker from University of Missouri, Megan Rolfe from Oklahoma State University, myself, Bob Weber from Kansas State University, and Matt Spangler from University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And we're basically almost all that's left of beef cattle breeding and genomics, or beef cattle breeding extension outreach. And anyone that's interested in that area is welcome to join us. But what we've done is tried to put together some revamped fact sheets and some short YouTube video clips that answer common questions that we get in our extension programs, like what is an EPD, or should I use the actual weaning weight or the genetic evaluation EPD of weaning weight, and things like that. And so basically what we've done there is work together to put together a set of fact sheets, and those are shown here. And we write the fact sheets and then peer review them amongst ourselves. And the fact sheets come in based on questions that we get from people, and you can see here all different things related to beef cattle breeding. And actually more recently I've started to get a lot of questions about what is gene editing, and so that second from the bottom there you can see we've just finished a fact sheet on what is gene editing, which is basically kind of a new approach to making targeted genetic modifications in the genome. And the way that these fact sheets are listed is you can click and open them on the internet and you get something like that there. But what we've also done is included under the image there, you can see click here for a printable PDF version. And we did that very thoughtfully, because we understand a lot of producers are still going to conventional meetings and like to have a paper handout, and they're not getting this information from the web. And so we've done this so that county agents can print out these fact sheets, which include all the information from the web, and it's in a format that's is more amenable, I guess, to a paper distribution. And so that's an example of what the beef sire selection recommendations fact sheet looks like if you were to print it out and as a PDF. And so those are available to anybody that wants to use this information. We also have a number of different little short vignettes, video vignettes that are available on YouTube, and we actually opened up an eBeef YouTube station, or a channel, as it's called. And these, if you look, they're very short, so they're a minute long, and it's why should I crossbreed, or what should beef producers use? Why should they use genomically enhanced EPDs? What's the selection index? What is whole herd reporting? some of the common questions we get, and hopefully people, if they just randomly Google that or do a Google in YouTube, would also pick up the answers to that. They may not even be in the eBeef website, but they'll get the answers to that and are able to find that information more easily than potentially digging through the e-extension site. And so all in all, that's the six of us, the motley crew that makes up eBeef. And so our website is ebeef.org, and that kind of channels you through to the different sites within e-extension. We also have the YouTube channel, and then we also have a Twitter account where we tweet out information when there's new fact sheets or things like that. And it was developed as part of myself and other colleagues that are part of eBeef are involved in some of these large AFRI grants related to feed efficiency, bovine respiratory disease, reproduction. And we felt like there was a need to eventually have a one-stop shop where we could put all of the outreach information coming from those different projects in one location. And so that was kind of the genesis that made us work to develop eBeef. And so far, it's a site that's just getting going, and if you're interested, we have a quarterly newsletter, and if you go to the ebeef.org website and scroll down that page, you can actually sign up for that newsletter if you're into beef cattle genetics, and you'll get information that we publish every quarter about new fact sheets that have come out or things that are going on in beef cattle and genetics. So that's kind of eBeef. The one other area I work in social media is Twitter, and my Twitter handle is BioBeef. And I use this exclusively for work-related tweets. And I think that's a really important thing you need to think about, because some people intersperse their personal tweets with their work tweets, and similarly with their Facebook page. And although I'm on Facebook, I don't use that at all for work purposes. That's solely to do personal things related to things of interest to family members. And the reason I say that is that especially Twitter is a place where if you're working in controversial areas, it can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. And I like to keep my personal life and family separate from that. And so I do use this particular site, and I'm certainly not a huge tweeter. I spend a little bit of time on it, but I use it more for letting people know if an important event has just happened, like the Aqua Advantage salmon getting approved, or if a new paper comes out that's particularly germane to my area, I'll tweet it. But I don't really engage in the back and forth when potentially some people start getting a little bit hostile. I guess I tend to just not really engage in that. And I think you need to make up your own persona as to what you're comfortable doing on Twitter and how much back and forth you're willing to engage people with. And I think that's a really important thing, because, you know, trying to discuss scientific ideas in 140 characters is kind of like scientific Tourette syndrome to me. There's really not enough room to discuss complex topics, and not everybody, you know, is willing or interested to speak out in public for many reasons. But I will just tell a story about the fact that I was involved in a debate called Intelligence Squared last year, where Bill Nye, the science guy, was in the audience, and subsequent to that debate around GMOs, he actually went to visit Monsanto, a plant breeding company, and has actually changed his mind around GMOs. And I think that, you know, you never know who you're going to reach when you do some of these things where you're kind of reaching out to the public. And although I may not have a very big Twitter presence or a big, you know, effect on public opinion, if you can have someone who's as prominent as Bill Nye, the science guy, who's one of the few scientists that Americans actually recognize, then you can have a much bigger impact than you yourself can have if you can influence some of these players to change their mind about a topic that they were previously against based on science and information. And I think this particular area, especially GMOs, is obviously a really controversial area, and there's a lot of groups that are working hard to create public fear and mistrust and disbelief in what the science says around the safety of them. And it's kind of interesting to me when Bill Nye came out saying this about GMOs, that there was kind of this alternate spin that was coming out of some of the groups opposed to it that suggests that Bill Nye, the science guy, had actually been brainwashed into changing his position on GMOs. And so it's always interesting to see how things get spun. But I do just want to talk about Twitter and the possibility of the importance of being really careful about what you say and the implications that a flippant email can have on your career. And basically this is a story about this lady who basically did a tweet before getting on a plane to Africa. And her tweet was that she said, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white." That was not the only silly thing she tweeted while she was sitting there on the pavement. She also tweeted about bad cucumber sandwiches, bad teeth, that type of things. But that one created an absolute Twitter storm. And by the time she got to the airport and landed in Africa, that whole thing had blown up into the #1 trending tweet in the whole Twitter sphere. And there were people at the airport that were actually there to photograph her getting off the plane when she realized what had actually happened. And although she said she did not mean that tweet literally, she was using it in a kind of a sarcastic way or irreverent way, it basically resulted in her getting fired and basically really blew up her life. And so I just want everyone to be aware of the importance of being really thoughtful about what you tweet and being really careful about using sarcasm because it does not translate in the printed media, and it can really have a big impact on you. And I think that gets into a little bit of, whose Twitter account is it? And if you're tweeting on behalf of Extension and you say something that gets taken out of context or is interpreted in a bad way, does that reflect on you or the university? And it's a little bit hazy at the moment, I think, as to whether we're tweeting or doing social media on behalf of our jobs or if it's on behalf of ourselves personally. It's a real grey area, I think, at the current time. But in addition to having a bad tweet, I think what's kind of concerning to me is that Twitter is quite often being used and social media to kind of cast doubt on science and scientists and to basically try to quieten down public sector scientists who might be researching controversial topics. And I think if I look at some of my recent peer-reviewed scientific publications, there's a whole bunch of different topics here, and I can tell you that probably not a single one of those received any tweets whatsoever until that last one came out, the prevalence and impacts of genetically engineered feedstuffs on livestock populations. And that thing got picked up by a journalist by the name of John Entine, who back in September of 2014 took what was really a very carefully worded publication and made a very sensational headline about it, which was basically categorically stating that the debate around GMO safety is over thanks to a new trillion-meal study. And basically the study was just a review of the publicly available data around the livestock health, of the health and well-being of our commercial livestock population since the introduction of genetically engineered feed. And when that particular paper came out, or that particular article came out, it had like 1 million hits, I think, or something like that within a couple of days. And the Twitter feed around that particular paper really went crazy. And it was funny because I had my little BioBeef account, which had 1 or 2 tweets. When that thing came out, it went absolutely nuts. But what happened subsequent to that was there was quite a lot of personal attacks from groups or individuals who were not happy with that paper, and they were testing that it really wasn't 1 billion animals in the meta-analysis that was and it wasn't. It was a summary of the billions of animals based on publicly available USDA data. And then there was questions around methodology, why were there so many broilers in the data set? Well, because we eat a lot of broilers is the answer to that. But, why not more dairy information? And so I tried at first to start kind of answering these questions and talking about concerns associated with meta-analyses. But towards the end, you see it starts dropping into, you didn't discuss antibiotic use in the context of somatic cell count growth promotion, typical at Monsanto co #liar. And then it kind of just disintegrates, and finally my friend there, Kevin Falter from University of Florida, says, this is part of the reason scientists don't engage. It's just really not worth the abuse. And more concerningly to me is that that paper was then made into an infographic on a toilet roll paper that suggested that it had bias and scientific shortcomings that was put out by GMO Free USA, and that's up on the internet now. And if you do a search of my name on the internet, then you'll get that as one of the hits on Google. And I've been in this position for many years, and so I have a solid academic reputation, so I'm not too concerned about it. But if you're a young scientist working in this area, and that's maybe the first paper you've ever come out with, and then that's the first hit that people get on Google when they look at your name and you're applying for your first faculty job or whatever, I think there's a real concern there because it can have a deleterious effect on your career, because basically it's libel, and there's very little you can do about it when it gets posted on the internet. And so, it's interesting that many of the sites that say they value transparency and disclosure are quite happy to criticize my paper, but they don't want to say who it is that's doing the criticisms, and they then go on and list what they consider to be scientific shortcomings around the paper. And so they try very hard to then spin a counter-argument and kind of change the perception in the social media around the study and kind of push back against what was reported on some of the sites that I mentioned earlier. And I guess my bottom statement is, don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it. And that's my friend Abraham Lincoln, who I think does a very good job of kind of putting a little bit of humor into what people believe when they see it on the internet, just because it happens to agree with their preconceived notions about a particular topic. And it's quite frustrating as a scientist when there's so much amazing information on the internet, and yet there's so much misinformation that's happily read and believed by people, when it would be very simple to actually do an internet search and find out the true answer to some of these questions. And so if you do a Google search of my name now, you can see down there at about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that you kind of get these hits. And as I said, that could be really quite concerning for a young scientist who's working in a controversial area. Do you really want to publish in that and have risk these types of malign and attacks? And then further to that, this year, myself and a group of people who work in outreach related to GMOs have all been the subject of a FOI attack, and by that I mean a Freedom of Information Act request, where all email correspondence that myself and these other scientists have with myself and about 30 different companies is subject to Freedom of Information Act request as a result of the fact that we work at public institutions. And I know as a scientist, before this happened, I pretty much had all my email, quite honestly, in one great big account, personal, public, private, everything was in there, and it was really my filing system, and I think I'm not alone in that regard. And so there was a request, and it for all of this correspondence from 2012, and for me that was about, I don't know, 75,000 emails or something like that we had to go through, and I've turned them over to the legal department here to respond to these FOIA requests. And I just, there's Kevin Falter is a plant geneticist and the chairman of the Horticultural Sciences Department at the University of Florida. And he also received a request like this and has turned over his emails, and they have been used in a way to really malign and slander him in a really inappropriate way. And I think some of these images and statements that are on the internet are give you a feel for how politically hot some of these topics get, and some of the unpleasant side of doing outreach around controversial topics, although I will argue that it's still a really important role of public sector scientists at the land-grant universities to try to get information out there around scientific topics, and to, when there is consensus around some of these things, to really try to get that out there, because there's a lot of groups that are working hard to get the opposite message out. And it's interesting with regards to GMO safety. I think the AAAS, there was a survey done, and I think it was something like 86% of scientists agreed that the products are generally safe, versus something like only 36% of the public. So there was the biggest gap in terms of what science says and what the public believes around this particular topic. And so it's an area that's really important to have science and communicators working in, but it's also an area that's pretty hot in that regard. And these Freedom of Information Act requests, I think, have really been something new for many scientists, and certainly for me they were. And interestingly, the Union of Concerned Scientists has an actual brochure out that talks about this and how can scientists respond to criticism and personal attacks. And I guess that gives you a feel for, it's not just GMOs, but many controversial topics: vaccines, climate change, animal research. A lot of researchers are getting these Freedom of Information Act requests. And although at first you might just think, well, I've got nothing to hide, why shouldn't I just hand everything over and get this over with? The Union of Concerned Scientists says that, whilst transparency is important, scientists need a safe space to develop and test new ideas, and that there needs to be a balance between transparency and free speech rights. And automatically complying with these requests can set a bad precedent for when your colleagues face similar attacks. And there have been very legitimate uses of the Freedom of Information Act requests, and I think that there's been some people that have been exposed taking inappropriate money or not disclosing funding that they're getting from industry. But if you look at that tweet at the top there, there's a suggestion here from EcoWatch that this particular individual took money from industry, and that was exposed from a FOIA request, and you can see that there's now an implication that in some way I'm taking money from, I'm not sure who, probably Monsanto, to do my research. And that type of allegation and insinuation can be, again, very damaging to young scientists particularly. So I agree that the public should have access to who's funding your academic research, and I personally have all of my grant funding up on my website. Anyone's free to see it. And of course, any funding you take from other, in consulting and that type of things. I think where these requests have kind of gone beyond that is a suggestion that any type of email correspondence or travelling to a meeting that might have been co-sponsored by industry groups is somehow inappropriate, because almost all of my extension talks are funded by the group that asks me to speak, whether it's the National Beef Cattlemen's Association or the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, and often there are industry funds involved in putting together these meetings. And I think that it needs to be a little bit more clearly delineated that is not an inappropriate activity for Extension to work in, and I think we often have private-public partnerships to put on Extension meetings and extend our research, and that is not an unexpected or inappropriate activity for an Extension professional to be involved in. So I'll just finish up then with some of the unresolved questions in my mind around the use of social media and internet in Extension. And one is, how do you document the impact of social media endeavours? So obviously there's clicks or pages or likes or that type of thing, but does that actually indicate change in behaviour that you can document? How should it be recognised in the merit and promotion system? And certainly, at least at my institution, we're still pretty much evaluated on the number of peer-reviewed publications, grants that have been successfully funded, and actual, in-face meetings with producers or clientele. And so that's, I think, one that really hasn't permeated the typical merit and promotion system at this stage. Saying I have a Twitter account is probably not going to get very much interest in the merit and promotion system. How do the materials and websites developed by teams and placed on the internet get rewarded at the home institution? So BioBeef in my particular situation, how is that viewed by my institution? Because it doesn't, if you looked at the design of that site, we didn't give any one university credit for that site. It was a joint effort of the 6 universities involved, and we tried to just keep it very agnostic in terms of who is doing the work, because it was really more interested in getting the information out than having institutional credit. This one is a real issue that I've discussed earlier, and that is, how do you draw the distinction between personal opinion, speaking as an extension professional, university employee, and speaking on behalf of the university? And I think, especially with Twitter accounts, that's a real something that there's really little guidance in that regard. How do you manage and document the time spent on social media? Because it is an absolute time sucker, no doubt about that. And then, who will mentor young faculty on the use of social media? Because they probably know more about social media than the older, more experienced, tenured faculty. And yet the tenured faculty are, meant to be giving them guidance on how much time to spend or what's an appropriate thing to do. And so I think maybe there's some opportunity there for some of our scientific societies to have some guidance there, or training sessions at our annual meetings in this regard, because I think there's probably no good peer group of more experienced extension professionals that have a good handle around this. And then finally, what is the appropriate response to defamation and slander and libel? Do you just take it? Do you not engage? Do you just block or mute people that are saying inappropriate things? And I think that's a little bit of a personal opinion, but eventually I could see where it borders on the edge of actual libel. And I don't know that there's a clear path at the current time in terms of, if internet trolls say something, is there any recourse, or do you just have to take it? And so that's kind of some of the issues I see about using social media, although I do acknowledge that it's a very powerful tool for extension. So with that, I will finish and open it up for questions, and thank you for listening.
Allison, there is one comment that came forward. You'd said that you really don't use Facebook for your work-related information, but one of the participants said that Facebook can be used in the workplace as a one-way announcement tool for upcoming workshops and events offered by Extension. And I know our own institution utilizes them kind of in that way, and if there's new information out, new publications, kind of advertise those. But do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's a totally appropriate thing for a Facebook page that's, I don't know, University of X or whatever. I guess I was talking more about your personal, allowing friends to access your personal Facebook page that are work-related. That's kind of where, for me, I think I kind of draw a little bit of a distinction there between my work and personal, and I tend to keep the Facebook personal and use other formats for work-related information.
Since you've got quite a bit of experience on using different platforms, in your professional work, can you give any advice on what platform with which a new professional might want to start? How they kind of get into that from a professional perspective?
Well, I think, depending who they're trying to reach is always the question you've got to start with. So are they after traditional ag clientele, or are they after having a broader societal kind of footprint? And one thing I've seen work well for young faculty is blogs. It's not something that I've personally done, but I know several young faculty that have blogs. You know, if you're working in a topic that's potentially got some interest to the wider audience, and I know a couple of very successful blogs. One that comes to mind is, and I can't remember the professor, but I think he's a weed scientist at Wyoming, Weed, I think he is, and he has a really good blog where, Niss, I think it's Andrew Niss maybe, where he discusses a lot of weed topics there, and so I think that's a really useful format. Again, it's going to take time, and I would advise young faculty to discuss with their mentors or however they're kind of being brought into the system, how that's going to be viewed in their merit and promotion package, because you know, we do a lot of things with our research, teaching and extension responsibilities, and the last thing we need is additional duties that aren't recognised by the system. And so I think you have to be very aware of where you're getting recognition as a young faculty member to ensure that you divert your time to the areas that are going to be rewarded come merit and promotion time.
Sure.
Dr. Andrew Niss, Weed Control Freaks, that's exactly the one I was after. Yeah, I think that's cool. Fine.
Here's another question that's come in. I'm interested in hearing suggestions on balancing outreach to the current producer group, usually not tech savvy, and the upcoming sons and daughters of these producers who are starting to take over.
Yeah.
That's an interesting quandary.
It is. And you know, the current producer group is, you still have to have conventional programs for them, and I guess maybe eBeef is trying to start bridging that divide for us to get into some of those newer young producers that are taking over, who are going to be, I agree, a lot more tech savvy, and you start to see them, you know, on their, I don't know if this is good or bad, but they're on their iPhone during the presentations now, whereas the older ones are typically not checking their Twitter feed during a presentation. So I don't have a good solution to that. I think we're probably going to have to be a little bit of a sandwich generation of extension professionals and provide both forums until social media and electronic approaches become kind of the norm. And I mean, I remember how old I am. I remember when email first came in, and there was discussion around, well, no one will ever use that, and, you know, well, none of my producers have email, whereas I think now probably, you know, a number of producers have email, and you know, in another 10 years, I would imagine the majority will have email, and so an electronic newsletter wouldn't have been even conceptually feasible 10 years ago, whereas now it's becoming almost, you know, the norm. So it's probably just an evolution at this stage.
You talked about some of, you know, the drawbacks and criticisms that you had received, you know, through some of your work that got posted. But what are the most positive experiences that you can recall using social media in your programs?
Well, I think it's human nature to focus on negative comments, so there's a lot of positive comments as well. And so I think what I've enjoyed is getting to know Twitter people, I don't know what they call Twitterers, are they, who I would have never interacted with otherwise, who are working in areas and will share information about, like Andrew Niss, just to use him, you know, I'll send him a question occasionally because I'll get some weed comment that I don't, or a weed question that I don't know the answer to, and it's really kind of expanded my range of professionals working in, and particularly professionals interested in scientific outreach and communication, and I think that's been a very enriching and enjoyable part of Twitter, is getting to know, you know, an expanded group of professionals working in scientific communication. So yeah, it's not all bad, and you get some, you know, really pleasant interactions and very encouraging comments from individuals that make it all worthwhile, I guess. So that would probably be my most positive.
I was intrigued on how you've used the YouTube videos, both in a humorous way, but with a message, and also with your factual usage. And I'm very impressed with how many hits one can get with particular subjects. So Is that a good place for somebody to start? Because they're producing informational videos, maybe short, people can get a quick message. Is that a good place for a new person starting out to start, maybe less threatening?
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on, what your topic is. It's obviously YouTube, you want to have a very visual topic, which is really easy if you're working in animal agriculture, but maybe it might be a little bit more difficult if, well, I don't want to insult anybody. I'm trying to think of something that won't insult someone, but I don't know, sorry, soil scientists, but soil science, maybe that might be a little bit more difficult to get, captivating imagery involved in your YouTube. But that's part of the creativity of YouTube, and that's what I think is fun about working in YouTube, is you can kind of just go crazy and try some innovative ways of making, science interesting in a way that you really can't with the print media.
The thing that I find nice about YouTube, just in everyday use, I broke something in my house, where do I go? There's got to be a YouTube video show me how to fix it, right?
It's amazing. It is amazing what's on YouTube.
A little bit from an administrative standpoint, is it important to share plans with administration and extension on your potential use to start using social media? How much did you interact with your administration? Say, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you see any problems with this? Did you get a blessing, or just kind of move forward?
Next question. I didn't. I just kind of went for it. I don't know how long ago I joined Twitter. I didn't actually do anything formal in that regard.
I suppose it depends on the institution and how your administrators view, those types of things. Personally, I've seen people who have gone and, had a formal discussion, and others who just did it. So
yeah,
I'm sure it's both ways.
Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to ask. Just that would be my advice to young faculty. Can't hurt.
I think the biggest thing maybe is just don't give us any surprises. At least if they know it exists.
It's like you have to,
it happens.
You have to keep professional, right? And I think that's the thing I always try and keep in mind in my interactions on social media that are in work-related venue or any social media. As how would this look on the 6 o'clock news? And just keep an eye to that and be professional in your interactions, and that's as you should be in all your extension interactions. I mean, nothing changes because you're on social media. It doesn't make you anonymous in some way.
You'd indicated, one of the many questions is how do you measure the impact when using social media? Do you have a feel for the impact your usage has had on your program? I mean, obviously a visibility thing, but are there other areas?
It's really hard. That's what I say. It's really hard. So that animal biotechnology video that I made, probably, I don't remember exactly, maybe 2005, but I'll go to, I'll go speak in China, and I'll have a professor come up and go, oh, yeah, I use that in my biotechnology class. And you're like, how are you meant to know that? And how do you even document that? And so there's things like that where I'll go and speak in other countries, and they'll say, oh yeah, I saw that on YouTube, and it's so, I think it's almost undocumentable, because the impact and the reach of what I call the voyeurs, they're the ones that don't vote they don't comment, they're just watching your Twitter feed or, watching something on YouTube, and they never really say that they're doing that. But you've influenced them and touched them and hopefully educated them, and that's made a difference. But it's how you document that, I think, is really quite difficult. So yeah, I don't have a good answer in that to that question.
Well, I think we're about ready to wrap up this afternoon, and I want to thank Dr. Van Eenenum for a very interesting presentation. And I want to thank all the participants who listened today or sent in comments or questions. So with that, I think we're finished. So everybody have a good day.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone.